getting cold. It's cold in Ohio.
It's not cold down in Palm Beach.
It's not be cold. It's not cold at my house. If I ever get to go there.
I think it's cold there, though.
It's probably that kind of
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
I was in Palm Beach 2 weekends ago, and I looked far and wide, and I couldn't find any poor people in the whole city.
Palm Beach.
There were none.
Okay.
Well, there's not in
Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's good to see everybody. Thanks for coming over and be a part of this dialogue today. Obviously, there's a lot that's going on currently right now in this administration and with the conversation about Title 42. Let me be very clear on something. Title 42 was always intended to be a temporary authority to be able to deal with the pandemic issues, always. The problem has been that I've asked questions of the administration for the last 8 months in particular. What are you going to do when it actually ends? What are you going to do when it actually ends? Their response has been, well, we have a 6-point plan that we've already implemented to be able to deal with this after it ends. Their plan clearly is not working, and so my question has been, what is your plan? So far, they've not been able to do this. They've not been able to resolve what the key issues are for immigration and the increase. Let me just give you a couple of clear, blunt statements. When you incentivize illegal activity, you get more illegal activity, period. It's not hard. What they've done is they've taken the dollars that have been allocated to them for enforcement, and they've instead used those dollars for processing, to speed up the processing issues that they had at the border, so that as thousands of people cross the border, those thousands of people could move into the interior country faster to make room for thousands more to be able to come in. They've also transitioned now to putting individuals on parole as soon as they cross the border. Well, that does two things. Once they transition and put into parole, they're given a work permit that same day. And so people are illegally crossing the border, getting a work permit immediately as they cross the border, and then they're put in line with ICE. So this is the second part of this that many people are not talking about. ICE that used to be used for enforcement within the interior of the country is now being used for processing people that are illegally coming into the country. The administration has changed their mission to not deporting people that are illegally into the country, but processing people illegally in the country farther into the country. That's a dramatic shift. What they've also done is the administration over and over again in the last 2 years, they have requested fewer beds for ICE, less money for detention, and they continue to try to defund ICE, at the same time change the mission of those that are remaining in ICE to do less. What does this look like? Well, we've got more than 2 million people have illegally crossed the border. Of that more than 2 million people that have illegally crossed the border, about 1.3 million of those individuals that have illegally crossed the border have been actually put into the interior of the country. So if you want to run the round numbers of this and what's actually happening, I tried to run some basic math on this. Of the ICE deportations versus this administration actually releasing people into the country, right now we have about 3,600 people a day that are being released into the country. 3,600 people a day. ICE is actually deporting 189 people a day. That is day after day after day. And when people talk about what is the crisis that's happening across the country, it is this administration that's facilitating the rapid release of people into the country and is ignoring the ICE responsibility of actually people leaving the country. I'm going to give a Christmas gift to the administration later today. I'm bringing 2 different bills to the floor and asking unanimous consent. One of them deals with the Title 42 authority. The administration already, when a court stepped in and said, we're not ready for this, asked for a week's extension of that, and now even in the filing that was done yesterday by the administration, they said, no, we're still not ready. Can you give us more time on this? I'd like to give them a longer extension of time and to keep that same authority in place on it. That pandemic authority is being used for multiple other programs, but this administration is saying we don't want to actually do border enforcement, but we do want to do other areas. We want to maintain that same authority that's there. The second thing is the administration continues to talk about the asylum rules, and they seem to be playing with this issue that's out there of if people travel to multiple different countries and then they finally get to the United States and request asylum, that's not asylum, that's economic opportunity. And I'm all in. We are the greatest nation in the world. I completely understand why people want to legally come to the United States. But right now this administration is encouraging people to literally travel from all over the world to illegally come to the United States. So the simple process that is, if you're traveling to multiple different countries before you come here and you didn't request asylum in that process before you came here in any of the previous countries, you can't request it here as well. It's not new. That idea has been around for a very long time, and it's time we actually implement that kind of idea, that we continue to allow asylum seekers to be able to come to this country that are truly seeking asylum, but for people that are actually just coming for economic opportunity, I understand why they would want to come. Let's go through the legal pathways to be able to do that as well. One quick reminder of this. Jay Johnson, 2019, made the statement that every morning he would get up in the morning, and the first thing he would get is his intelligence briefing, and then he would look at the number of people that illegally crossed the day before. That was how he started every single day. And he knew if it was more than 1,000, it was going to be a bad day. Right now, today, we have more than 9,000 people a day illegally crossing our border. 9,000 a day. During the time of Jay Johnson, during that surge time period, we had a little over 500,000 people illegally cross our border in a year. A little over 500,000 in a year. Under this administration, we have over 500,000 in 2 months. And it's continuing to accelerate. This is a very real crisis that for whatever reason many people are ignoring and saying it's old news. But as the rise of fentanyl comes into our country, as the crisis continues to build in the humanitarian crisis on our southern border, please understand, we understand full well the pull factor. The pull factor is this administration's policies. This was not happening under the Obama administration. It is happening under this administration. The law is the same. The difference is this administration is not enforcing the law, and they're encouraging more and more illegal immigration, and it needs to stop, and we need to address that today. We have multiple colleagues that are going to step in that have been very passionate about working through this. Senator Portman's obviously been a lead in Homeland Security on this, and asked him to be able to come forward and be able to speak into this.
Thank you, James. So here's the chart. These numbers tell the story. Thank you, Rick. So some people say, well, we had an immigration crisis under President Obama. We had one under President Trump. We have one now. This is different in kind. And again, these numbers tell the story in a very plain way. Over 2 million in 2022 apprehended by the Border Patrol. So these numbers of 9,000 people a day are an aberration. This is not what we've seen before. It's a much bigger problem. The solutions to the problem, part of it is keeping Title 42 in place because that's all we have. Of course, it's not the long-term solution because the public health emergency at some point will go away. The administration tells us in so many other areas, including student loans and including the number of ICE beds they can fit in the facility, that the public health emergency is still with us. So it would be a contradiction for them to say that Title 42 isn't needed. But we understand that Title 42 isn't the long-term solution. The long-term solution is actually to enforce the law, number one. And number two, to change some of these laws, including the asylum law, which clearly is not working. Why do I say that? Well, because we have a backlog right now of about 1.4 million people. Some say it's even higher. People are waiting for their first hearing, sometimes as long as 6 or 7 years, with the ability to appeal those decisions, maybe up to 12 years. Is it any wonder that people are coming to our border? This is a pull factor in the sense that people are being told by their smugglers, and the smugglers are right, that if you make it to America and get across the line and just walk up to a Border Patrol agent, everything will be okay. You'll be able to come into the country and start working. Your kids can go to school, and you can become embedded in our communities, and that's what's happened. So I don't think anybody behind me disagrees that America is great because of our welcoming of immigrants over the years. And we all support legal and orderly immigration. But that's not what's happening now. And with it is there a lot of dangers. I issued a report this week, some of you saw, about unaccompanied kids coming to the border. Unaccompanied children are unfortunately too often being mistreated by our own government, sometimes sent to live with the very smugglers who brought them to the border to be further exploited. It's outrageous what's happening to these kids. We should all be, Republicans and Democrats alike, talking about this. The amount of sexual assaults and abuse that's happening in connection with this is something we too often forget. a need to keep front of mind. I will also say that in terms of enforcing the law, the Obama administration and the Trump administration, faced with much less of a challenge on the border, were much more diligent in enforcing the law. In the Obama administration, they actually detained more unlawful migrants and deported more. There were about 350,000 individuals in that category, as an example, in FY14. In the Obama administration, they deported 65% of those individuals. So 65% of those who had been detained, who were unlawfully here, were being deported. If you apply that same number to the Biden administration, they deported about 56,000 people, which is about 5% of the roughly 1 million people who have been processed. So the numbers to remember here are 65,000 or 65% in the Obama years were deported, and 5% are being deported today in the Biden administration. This is not just a crisis, this is becoming a catastrophe. In the Trump administration, they also detained more people and deported more people. In the Biden administration, faced with these incredible numbers, they're detaining fewer people and deporting far, far fewer people. So a lot of this is just about enforcing the law. Even though we know the deportations in the Biden administration are only 5% compared to 65%, again, this is of a much, much larger group. So when I was on the border in March of 2021, we went to the El Paso sector. All my colleagues have been to the border numerous times, as I have. And at that point, Title 42 was something that was being discussed generally. This was in the middle of COVID. And what they told me, and this came from the El Paso sector chief, that if Title 42 were to go away, that they would lose control of the border. This was back in 2021. We've all seen this coming. This is not a surprise. Again, it's not the long-term solution here, but it's going to make things far worse. The numbers are hard to come by, but the best that we have is that roughly 45% of those people who come to the border right now without legal documents are being turned away with Title 42, mostly single males from Mexico. But it's about 45%. And yet we have these huge numbers of over 2 million people in the last fiscal year. So this is going to turn a crisis into a catastrophe. And I urge the administration, even at this late hour, to change course. And they can. They can do it today through administrative action and at least keep this Title 42 in place, as they have other public health emergency provisions, and give the Congress the time to work with them to fix this problem.
Thank you all for being here for a few minutes today. The issue with Title 42 is something that Tennesseans are beginning to realize the impact of very quickly. In Tennessee, our governor received information that in order to mitigate this situation at the southern border, that ICE is going to begin to move single adults who are awaiting their hearing from the New Orleans office to Tennessee. 50 per busload, and at least 2 busloads every week. Now, what is so interesting to me about this is Title 42 is there for a reason. The Biden administration knows this. And they don't want it to go away right now. They're saying, if you're going to get rid of it, and we would like to get rid of it, but we don't want you to do that before Christmas. So hang on just a minute. Hang on. And let's get back past Christmas, and then we want to take Title 42 away. The estimate is this. When they take it away, they're going to have 15,000 people coming to that border every single day. And they know that they've created this situation at the southern border that they cannot contain. And the border communities are saying, you got to do something. You're overrunning us. And it doesn't matter if those mayors of those cities and towns and counties are Republican or Democrat. They're saying, federal government, you have to do something about this. So the Biden administration comes up with a plan. Let's make every town a border town. Let's make every state a border state. And let's take those that are illegally entering and let's shift them to other communities. And by the way, that means those states, those cities, their taxpayers are going to have to bear the cost for social services, health services, education, housing, food, for those that are coming in the country illegally. Because the people that are coming across the border, the 2 million, these are individuals that have been abused. As I've been to the border for years now, one of the things that we know is this, that women and children are being physically and sexually abused. We know that the cartels are running that border on the Mexico side. These cartels are so emboldened, they're now operating on U.S. soil. When you talk to local law enforcement, they will tell you where the cartel hubs are working from, where the drugs are coming from that are coming into their community. And moms and dads and brothers and sisters in our communities have all experienced the impact of fentanyl in our communities, the lives that have been lost, the families that have been wrecked because of the drugs that are coming across that southern border. We are doing everything we can to make certain that Title 42 stays in place. It is needed. Our Border Patrol need to know that members of the U.S. Senate are going to stand with them to make certain that they have what they need to, first of all, secure that border, and then secondly, to be sure that we mitigate the issues that are being caused at that southern border. And it is unseemly that we have a spending bill that would have money for other nations to secure their border. But then the money in the spending bill that is there for Border Patrol says they cannot use it on border security.
It is becoming harder and harder not to conclude that the border crisis is intentional. I mean, nobody is this incompetent, right? The Biden administration's position on Title 42, on the Remain in Mexico program, on efforts to come up with a definition of what refugee status means that looks like somebody designed it on purpose. None of the president's positions on this make any sense to me, unless I view it from the perspective of, well, maybe he wants this to happen. Maybe he's listening too much to the berserk wing of his own party, the immigration activists, who think that vetting people at the border is racist. I think the president has misread the American people, and he's better than that. He's certainly more intelligent than that. The American people support immigration. Every year, America welcomes about 1 million of our world's neighbors to become American citizens. That's more than any other country in the world. But the American people do not support illegal immigration. For one thing, when you ask an ordinary American, well, why don't you support illegal immigration? They look at you and say, well, because it's illegal. Duh. It's against the law. We thought what you folks in Washington were supposed to do is uphold the rule of law. But the second thing Americans will tell you is something to the effect of, look, here's how we view the southern border. We view the southern border like we view the front door of our home. We, most Americans say, lock our front door at home at night. We don't do that because we hate everybody on the outside. We do that because we love the people on the inside. And we'd like to know, as a practical matter and a matter of public safety and our own safety, who's coming in and out of our home. And I think that's the way the American people view the southern border. And I think President Biden is making and has been making and continues to make a huge mistake. But I confess, it is a mystery to me. Nobody is this incompetent. It has to be intentional.
In Florida, people will come up to me and they say, when they talk about the southern border, they said, is the Biden administration dumb? Are they incompetent? Or is this intentional? They say, when you look at the number of people that have died of fentanyl overdoses, they say, does the Biden administration just not care how many people are dying of drug overdoses in this country? When you hear about the numbers, about the number of people who come across the border, when you hear about the number of terrorists that are caught, when you hear about the number of criminals that have come across the border, people ask me, does the Biden administration just not care, or do they just this incompetent? I don't think there's any question. This is all intentional. For whatever reason, and I don't know who will be able to explain it to anybody, the Biden administration believes our border should be completely open. So what we're going to continue to see is we're going to continue to see terrorists come across our border, criminals come across our border, drugs come across our border, more Americans are going to die, we're going to have more crime, and the Biden administration is not going to change. There's nothing they're doing that would change. Mayorkas comes up here and testifies that the border is secure. That's a complete lie. If he actually believes it, he's the only person in America that believes this. So we've got to get control of our border. I'm from an immigration state. We like legal immigration. I've been to the border like everybody else up here has been to the border. There's some wonderful people that want to come to the United States to live our dream. They should come here in a legal manner, in a manner where they're not human trafficked, in a manner where their daughters and their wives are not raped and victimized. So why the Biden administration doesn't care about any of these individuals, I have no idea.
You might ask yourself, why did the Biden administration's Justice Department ask the Supreme Court to let Title 42 stay in place while they come up with a plan? But I think what you've heard from my colleagues is that what you're seeing now is the plan. The plan is to let anybody and everybody who wants to come to our country, primarily through my state, the state of Texas, let them come in and place them in the interior of the United States, many of whom will never show up again for an immigration court hearing in the future. And not only does this benefit the human smugglers that are charging thousands of dollars for each person that they smuggle into the United States, and who coach them to say the magic words so they can invoke our asylum laws. But this also enriches the drug lords and drug runners that smuggled the drugs into the United States that took the lives of 108,000 Americans last year alone. We've heard a lot about fentanyl, synthetic opioids. 71,000 of those 108,000 who died, Americans who died as a result of fentanyl poisoning. And I have to agree with my colleagues who said the Biden administration can see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears what's going on. So why don't they do something? Well, I think the answer to that is they don't care. That's a hard thing to say. How can you not care about 108,000 Americans losing their lives due to drugs being smuggled across the border? But I don't know what other conclusion you could draw. Unless anybody think that this is a product of the violence and poverty in Central America and Mexico. If you go down to the border and look at the list of people who are being detained, who are coming across the border, they come from as many as 150 different countries. 150 different countries. What that tells me is that if you have enough money, you can take a ride from wherever you are and make your way to the southern border and then invoke the asylum laws and be then transported into the interior of the country, given a slip of paper and say, show up for a court hearing. And does it surprise anybody that a large percentage of those individuals simply don't show up because the backlog of the immigration courts will take years to clear? And as long as there's no enforcement by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which there is not under this administration, then you're pretty much made it. And the ones that are mainly benefiting from this are the cartels that are literally reaping billions of dollars in profits as a result of their human cargo that they smuggle into the United States as the illegal drugs that come in. And by the way, if you're concerned about crime in our communities, once the drugs come across the border, how are they distributed? Well, primarily through criminal gangs. Why do you see gun violence in places like Chicago every weekend? Because the gangs are fighting for market share and for territory so they can continue to engage in the drug sales in those areas. This is all connected to what's happening at the border. The Biden administration should be ashamed, but I can only conclude, based on everything we've seen and everything we've heard, that they simply don't care.
We're glad to be able to take some questions. As you hear from all of us, we just want to have a legal immigration system. We just want this to be able to work and for the administration to actually enforce existing law. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
Two questions for you. The first one, just wanted to hear your reaction to the White House's comments yesterday. So the press secretary said that the border is secure. Anybody who doesn't have a legal basis to stay will be removed, and that anyone who suggests the border is open is doing the work of smugglers spreading misinformation, which is very dangerous. What is your reaction to that?
Yeah, I would encourage her to actually go to the border. What she has not been willing to do, and to be able to stand there like all of us have, and to be able to look across the border and say, please tell me this is not open. Because when we've stood there at the border, we've watched people illegally crossing the border. They come in, check in with Border Patrol, and within hours, they're heading out into the country. So if she means open border as if no one pays attention to you when they come across, I guess she's correct on that. But if she means that they're actually deterring people from coming, they're clearly not. And it's not just me saying that. Look at the hard numbers. Look at the Biden administration versus the Obama administration numbers even, and to see what they did on detentions, on what they did on deportations, on how they actually applied the law of the land. And you can see clearly that's good spin, but it becomes that who you're going to believe, me or your lying eyes kind of moment. Go ahead. What's the second part?
So there's, I'm sure you guys have heard the bipartisan effort between Senator Sinema and Tillis that would provide would solidify benefits for DACA recipients and also provide more money for border security. Is this something you all would support just to enable people to security?
So I'll let everybody answer for themselves at their own time on it, but let me just say we haven't seen any text on that. That's a two-page piece of paper. Text matters on those things. All of us have been very involved in trying to be able to actually get immigration policy that's good immigration policy. I think we would all say there's a real need to be able to deal with changes in statute and how we define asylum, how we do processing to make sure that we tighten all that up. Every administration asks for that. I'm very willing to be able to do all of those things, to be able to engage in that. But that particular proposal is not really a proposal that's a text piece out there. That's a double-sided sheet of paper with a set of ideas, and we're glad to be able to maintain the conversation on the ideas. Yes, sir. Sure, yeah.
Just on that point, to me, one of the things that makes me angry as somebody who would actually like to engage in negotiations on immigration law reforms is the fact the Biden administration has poisoned the well because of this. People in my state are outraged. We're the state that's most affected because people come across the 1,200-mile border in Texas, and they overrun our border communities. In Del Rio, Texas, you remember 15,000 Haitian asylum seekers showed up in a little town of Del Rio of 35,000 people and parked themselves under the bridge. Can you imagine how disruptive that could be? So as somebody who would actually like to see us work on rational immigration reform, because as you've heard from all of us, we all believe legal immigration is a positive good for the country, it makes me angry that the Biden administration has poisoned the well by allowing this to happen, this humanitarian and public safety crisis. And that's why even good ideas that are being floated this late in the year have no way of getting any traction. And last thing I would say is Democrats have controlled the majority of the House and the Senate and the White House for the last 2 years. I've been on the Judiciary Committee that whole time, and the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee has not moved one bill, one immigration bill, across the floor in 2 years. It's been 10 years since the Dreamers were given access to the country and basically left to hang for themselves, now that the the Court of Appeals and District Court have held that what President Obama did was illegal. And yet the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who says he cares a lot about the Dreamers, has not introduced a single bill. Senator Schumer hadn't marked up a single bill on the Senate floor. And so it makes me conclude that really they like talking about the issue, but they don't like doing anything about it.
Sir, you want to make a response to this too, so you want to make a comment? Yeah.
Well, I'll be quick. Senator Lankford is very polite. Let me put it another way. If the White House press secretary said that the border is secure, she's either not telling the truth or she's day drinking. All she needs to do is sober up and or go down there. Number two, in terms of Senator Tillis's and Senator Sinema's bill, I applaud their efforts. We haven't seen a bill. But I can tell you right now, I am not going to vote for a bill that provides for amnesty in return for the Biden administration its promise to do better. Okay? And number three, you folks are going to miss Rob Portman when he's gone. It has been an honor to serve with him.
Now I have to say something nice about Senator Kennedy.
No, I'm going to leave. You have to say something nice.
No, I appreciate you, John. And, one thing he just talked about was the fact that the border is not secure and that anybody who says otherwise is living in a fantasy land. Let me give you one specific data point on this. In October, which is the last month for which we have Border Patrol numbers, there were more gotaways, as they call them. In other words, people that did not come up and present themselves to the Border Patrol. We don't know who they are. We do know that there are about 100 people who are on the terrorist watch list who apparently have gotten through. But we believe that these are people who are likely to have drugs with them or otherwise would not be eligible for even getting in under the asylum rules. And so they chose to sneak around the Border Patrol and to evade Border Patrol. Record numbers. So how is that a border being under control? Because you could argue, well, it's okay to let more people in, which is what the Biden administration wants to do, and have them wait and never deport them. Because through this asylum process, remember, the key number is that if you go through the process and have your hearing, that somewhere between 80 and 90%, 85% is the figure that I think is generally used, are turned down. So you have this huge backlog of almost 2 million people. You have years and years of waiting, and then when you go through the process, most people are turned away, and yet they are not deporting people. Remember the 5% figure versus the 65% figure under the Obama years even. So this is not a secure border. Finally, let me just say to Senator Lankford, and I wanted to say this in front of Senator Cornyn, Senator Kennedy, and others, we are trying. And in the Homeland Security Committee, which is a committee that has jurisdiction over the Department of Homeland Security, therefore a lot of border oversight, Senator Lankford and I can't even get a hearing on immigration. And we have tried. We've gone to the extraordinary measure of actually doing our own hearings that are only Republican because we can't get the committee leadership, because they're listening to their leadership, to even have hearings, much less mark up legislation. Senator Cornyn talked about the same thing in the Judiciary Committee. So there has been an inability to move things forward. And yet, John Cornyn has joined up with Senator Sinema on a bill that I support that processes people at the border rather than having them come to the interior for asylum. I've got legislation with Senator Sinema that provides the Border Patrol an additional 1,000 personnel and has a Border Patrol reserve and increases their pay. I've got another bill with Senator Risch with regard to making sure that the border wall is finally completed and the technology is put in place. Senator Lankford has other legislation that he's been working on. We've all been talking to Senator Tillis and Senator Sinema. I would say for my own sake, I generally support what they're trying to do. But we don't have that interest in the administration or in the Democratic leadership here in the Senate. That's what we've all experienced. So crisis becomes catastrophe. And my hope is, long after I'm gone, in a week, yeah, that you know, these responsible members who want to do something about this, who believe in immigration, believe it enriches our country, but believe that we have to stop all of the consequences of illegal immigration, including the fentanyl, including the sexual abuse, including the way children are treated. We have to deal with this issue. And my hope is in the next few months with the new Republican Congress, that will happen. And I hope that, you know, what we're talking about today in terms of Title 42 isn't the only discussion. It has to be a deeper discussion of protecting our country.
Yes, let me take a couple more, and I'll make it quick. Yes, sir.
What has been from you guys, sort of behind the scenes or in private, any outreach at all from the administration, whether that's the White House or the DHS, as far as the immigration situation in your state? Have you guys had any sort of interface on that with providing it?
As far as with our states to do what? Just be able to talk to them what's going on? Sure. Our conversation has been pretty consistent with the administration to talk about here's what the problem is, here's what we're seeing. We give reports after we go to the border to be able to talk through what we saw. We talk about the numbers. We request numbers from them so we can get a chance to talk about it. Senator Portman mentioned the latest numbers we have are the October numbers. It's the end of December, and they're still holding the November numbers because they don't want to discuss or want them in public what those November numbers are. They have them. They get them every single day, but they're just not turning them over. And so part of our challenge is getting information from them, trying to keep them informed, and to be able to say, this is what's happening now. What are you going to do about it? And they continue to go back, well, we have a 6-point plan that we've been running since April, and all I can say is your 6-point plan is not working.
So those conversations, from what you're saying, seem like they're a one-way street where you guys are doing most of the talking. Are you hearing anything from them?
I rarely get a call from them, occasionally, but rarely get a call from them to be able to say what's going on. We're typically saying this is a problem, and they're typically nodding their head and saying, yes, it is, we're working on it, but we see no changes. Yes, ma'am. Do you think he's legally present? Is that what the question is here? Okay. Okay.
What do you think he needs to say to keep Republicans, particularly those who've been skeptical about more?
I'm going to stay centered on the immigration issues on this, just for the nature of this conversation on it. But anyone else have a quick question on it? Same question? Okay.
If you support the funding and if you anticipate that you or your colleagues might vote against it tonight on the night he's here.
We're going to watch and see what happens on that, but I'm going to stay focused on the immigration issues on this. So one more question on immigration? Yes, ma'am. Sure. Yeah.
Immigration reform, they've been very reluctant, even in 2013 with the immigration to bipartisan
Right.
package. Have you been talking with House Republicans about whether or not we can get immigration through?
So first we got to get House Republicans organized. They've got to be able to know what their committee chairmen are, where they're going to go, who we're going to be negotiating with on that. So they've got to resolve that in early January. Then yes, we'll be very willing to be able to have those dialogues. What I typically hear from House members are the Senate has put together a bill that we really, really hate, and we're afraid that if we pass a security bill, that it's going to suddenly flip into that bill into the Senate that we don't like, and so we don't want to do anything on it. I don't hear an unwillingness to be able to negotiate, to be able to talk about the hard issues. Everyone sees the problem on immigration. Everyone sees it. The issue is how do we actually solve it? The biggest challenge that we've had is getting everybody in the room, talking through the issues, getting to a resolution, and solving it. The second problem is there's no deadline. So Congress seems to function best on a deadline. Clearly, just watch what's happening on the floor today, and you'll see suddenly there's a deadline happening, and so Congress seems to be getting busy on things. With immigration, there's no deadline. That's why when President Trump said, I'm going to end DACA in 6 months, it created a deadline. Congress got busy, started negotiating, started talking about how do we resolve this. We had 3 bills that came up in the Senate. None of them got 60 votes. We're about to start going into conference to be able to resolve the differences, and the court pulled it away and said, we want to look at DACA. As soon as that happened, deadline went away. Congress stopped working on it. We have a new deadline now. With the court stepping back and saying that DACA was illegal, we have a new deadline. And I think it's going to push Congress on both sides of the hill to be able to talk about, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to resolve all these issues? And so my hope is that we'll have serious, substantive dialogue about how we're going to resolve all the immigration issues rather than just a bill being floated at different times and saying, look, here's the solution. But there's no groundwork that's been done. There's no preparation that's been done for it. Because what's happening at the border right now can't continue. It just can't. And I think this administration believed there would be a surge at the border that would somehow magically just go away a few months later, and they're finding out a bad situation 2 years ago. It's just getting worse today, and it's unresolved. Y'all, thanks for staying engaged in this issue. It is important to the country. A lot of people care about it. Thanks, y'all.